Functions are the backbone of a lot of modern JavaScript applications, and therefore they're pretty important in day-to-day TypeScript work. There's honestly not a whole lot of differences between how we use functions in TypeScript versus how we would in JavaScript, at least at a basic level anyway, so let's take a look. Let's take a look at how we might declare a function in regular JavaScript. Here we have a simple function that combines two strings together. Nice and simple. In regular JavaScript, there's nothing really stopping us from passing a number, for example, as our first argument, and then a string for our second argument. Of course, adding a string and a number together might cause some odd behavior, and it isn't really what we intended this function to be used for. Let's see how we could rewrite this function in TypeScript to make things a bit safer. Yep, it's honestly that simple. We've kept almost everything the same as we had in JavaScript, we've just added types for each one of our arguments that we want to enforce. Now, if we tried to pass in a number as an argument which is typed explicitly as a string, this would not be valid TypeScript code and it would not compile. Which is correct. That's type safety kicking in once again and saving us from more runtime errors. Okay, let's turn this back into functional code once again. That's much better. Just like how we use our constants and variables, TypeScript automatically tries to infer the type that our function returns. In this case, because we're taking two strings and adding them together, TypeScript automatically infers that the result of combining two strings is a string, which is correct. But also, just like our constants and variables, if we want to have a little bit more control over what type we want our function to return, we can explicitly add a type at the end of our parentheses. In this example, we are telling TypeScript that a string is the type of value that this function must return. If we return any other value, type safety will once again kick in when we go to compile our code, and it will throw an error. And that was a whistle-stop tour of the basics around functions in TypeScript. Let's go back to the editor and write a few more examples. Hi there, just a quick interruption to let you know that this video is part of a larger course called an Introduction to TypeScript. It's aimed at JavaScript developers who basically want to get up and running with TypeScript in about 2 hours. I'm going to be uploading the entire course for free on this YouTube channel over the next few months, but if you want direct access to the entire course like right now, there should be a link on the screen or in the description where you can get the entire thing now. Thanks again for watching, back to the video. Okay, so in this exercise, we're going to be covering some basic functions. So to start off, I'll be creating a new file called functions.ts. So I'm just going to go over to my src folder, create functions.ts, and then hit save. Next, I'm going to hit Command and J to open my terminal, and I'm going to run yarn tsc-w from the root directory. That's going to monitor my files and compile them when they change. Next up, we don't want to be using ESLint on these exercise files, so I'm just going to go ahead and disable ESLint. And now we're ready to write our first function in TypeScript. So I'm going to create a really simple function which is just going to take two numbers as arguments, and it's just going to multiply those two numbers. So let's go ahead and write that function. We're going to go ahead and name it multiply, and it's going to take two arguments. We'll go A, and that's going to be a number, followed by B, and that's also a number. Use the arrow syntax and open our braces, and we're ready to write the contents of our function. Because we're just going to be multiplying the two numbers that gets passed into it, we can just return A times B, and then hit save. Next up, let's call that function. So let's multiply 2 times 5. So let's go multiply 2 and 5 and hit save. So far we've declared a really simple function which takes two arguments, both of which are numerical, and then just multiplies the two. Let's see what would happen if we passed in the wrong type of value into our function. So let's say, for example, we pass in the number 2 as the first argument, and then we pass in the number 5, but as a string. So let's go ahead and change that on line 7, and then just hit save. And if we go down to our terminal, we can see that TypeScript has thrown an error stating that the argument of type 5, which is a string, is not assignable to the parameter of the type number. And that's great news because that means that TypeScript is doing its job and has just prevented us from passing in the wrong type of variable into our function. For the time being, let's just reset that back to the number 5 and hit save. As stated before as well, we can also explicitly declare the type that we want our function to return. So let's go ahead and in this multiply function, let's go ahead and return the string of the value that it multiplies. So first let's annotate our function so the return type is a string. And we can do that by just going to line 3, adding a colon, and adding the return type, which is a string. Right now, TypeScript gets a number and another number and multiplies those two together to return a number. And so TypeScript isn't very happy about this because we've explicitly said that the return value of our function should be a string. And at the moment, it's a number. And so the return value of our multiply function should be a string. So we can do that by just wrapping our return value, a multiplied by b, in a string, just like this. This has now satisfied TypeScript and there are no more type errors. Okay, let's go one step further. Let's say, for example, we wanted the option to be able to pass a string or a number to our multiply function and then for it to multiply it regardless of whether it's a string or a number. We can do that with the help of union types, so let's see how that would look. First of all, let's change the types of our arguments on our function to take either a string or a number. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a union type for each, so string or a number, and hit save. Because there is now the possibility for A or B to potentially be a string, this is no longer valid TypeScript code because we can't multiply strings together. So first we're going to need to determine whether our arguments are strings or numbers, turn them into numbers, and then multiply those numbers. So let's have a look at how we would do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and create two new constants inside of our function. One is going to be called a number and the other one is going to be called b number. First, we're going to check the type of each argument to see if it's a string. If it is a string, then we're going to pass it into a number. If it is a number, then we're just going to leave it as it is. So let's do an inline ternary to do that. So I'm going to go type of a equals a string. Then we are going to pass int a, and for the radix, I'm just going to pass 10. If it isn't a string, we can assume it's a number. So we can just go ahead and just say that our a number is just a. And let's just follow exactly the same path that we just took for our b value. So type of b, if type of b is a string, then pass b into a number, otherwise just use the b value. Okay, let's see what TypeScript has inferred these values as. They should now both be numerical. So if I hover over a number, it's a number. If I hover over b number, it's a number. That means that everything is working the way that it should be. Let's go ahead and change our multiplications to use the a number values and b number value that we've just created and hit save. Now we've successfully created a function which takes either string or numerical values, passes them if they are strings, and then returns the value multiplied as a string. So now if we wanted to, we could do something like multiply 2 as a string times 10 as a number, and that would be valid code. We could also do something along the lines of multiply 10 as a number multiplied by 5 as a string. This is just the tip of the iceberg with what can be achieved with functions in TypeScript. As you develop your knowledge in TypeScript, there'll be a lot more that you can do with them, but for the time being, this should help you get to grips as you're starting out. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.